For 40 years, I built a farming empire from dust and sweat. I protected it with iron-clad legal walls. But the one threat I never anticipated came from inside my own home. While I lay helpless in an ICU bed, my son and his wife didn't just sell a piece of land, they tried to sell my soul. What they didn't realize is, my soul wasn't for sale, and their freedom was the price they were about to pay. This is the story of how I turned my deepest betrayal into my greatest victory. Stick around to see how it all unfolded. Chắc chắn rồi. Tôi hiểu bạn muốn một phiên bản sâu sắc hơn, chi tiết hơn, để khán giả thực sự chìm đắm vào nỗi đau và bối cảnh của câu chuyện. Dưới đây là bản thảo mở rộng của chương 1. Tuân thủ nghiêm ngặt các yêu cầu của bạn. The first thing that hits you when you come home after 3 weeks in a hospital isn't the sight of your own front door. It's the smell. For 21 days, my world had been reduced to the size of a private room, a universe scented with the sharp, sterile ghost of antiseptic and the bland, impersonal smell of bleached linen. It was the smell of sickness and survival. But the moment the heavy oak door swung inward, the air of my life rushed out to greet me. It was a complex, two-layered scent built over 40 years. Underneath the familiar polish of lemon oil that our housekeeper, Maria, used on the furniture, there was the rich, comforting aroma of worn leather from my armchair, and the faint, ever-present hint of cedar from the logs stacked by the great stone fireplace. And beneath it all, the true scent of home, the dry, earthy perfume of the West Texas soil. A scent that had seeped into the very bones of this house. My legs felt like they belonged to another man, unsteady and thin. A body can betray you in more ways than one, and 3 weeks of letting machines do the living for you leaves the muscles to wither in protest. I placed a hand against the cool plaster of the entryway wall, taking a moment to let the world stop tilting. Ethan was in the living room. He wasn't rushing to help me, just standing there, silhouetted against the large picture window that overlooked the rolling plains. He'd been watching something on the television, but the screen was dark now, its reflection showing a distorted image of a father and son separated by a gulf of polished hardwood floor. He turned, and a flicker of something I couldn't name crossed his face. It wasn't the relief of a son seeing his father pull through a dangerous surgery. It was closer to the mild annoyance of someone whose quiet afternoon has just been interrupted. The expression was gone in a second, papered over with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Hey, Dad, you're home. I thought they were keeping you till tomorrow." His voice was too loud, too cheerful. They get tired of looking at you eventually. I said, my own voice, a dry rasp that scratched at my throat. I began the slow, deliberate journey to my armchair. Each step was a negotiation between my will and my body's weakness. The chair, a massive throne of dark brown leather, was the one piece of furniture that was truly mine, sinking into its familiar, body-shaped indentation felt less like resting and more like reclaiming a piece of myself. Ethan hovered, a restless energy radiating from him. He picked up a crystal decanter from the side table, swirled the amber liquid inside, and put it down without pouring a glass. He couldn't be still. He was never good at hiding his feelings, but the ones churning inside him now felt alien, unsettling. So, Isabella says, he began, the opening salvo in a battle I didn't yet know was being fought. She's away right now, taking a little trip. A trip. Now I kept my gaze fixed on him. I would have thought she'd want to be here. Well, yeah, of course. he stammered, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. But she really needed a break. It's been incredibly stressful. You know, with you in the hospital, me trying to manage things here, the bills piling up. It's been a lot for her to handle. He paused, taking a deep breath as if to brace himself. He was trying to build a narrative, to frame his next words in the best possible light. But that's the good news. It's all handled. We're finally debt-free. I paid off all my credit cards. We even paid off the last of Izzy's student loans. We're completely in the clear. And it's all thanks to you. Really. I waited. The silence in the cavernous room was broken only by the loud ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I didn't ask him how. I made him tell me. I made him own the words. He finally broke, the confession tumbling out in a rush, as if saying it fast would lessen its impact. It was that old ranch. You know. Saint Sebastian, the one up by the Black Creek. Izzy said you were just holding on to it for sentimental reasons. That it was basically just fallow land. She has this friend, a business connection, who was looking for a parcel for long-term grazing. It was perfect timing. Dad, we got 200,000 for it. Can you even believe it? 200 grand? Just sitting there. It was enough to wipe the slate clean, and still have enough for Izzy to have that vacation in the Bahamas she's always dreamed of. She deserves it. He stood there then, chest puffed out slightly, a proud smile fixed on his face, genuinely waiting for me to congratulate him, waiting for me to validate this monumental act of idiocy. He saw himself as the hero of the story, the dutiful son, the provider, the man who had finally stepped out of his father's shadow and made a decisive move, and in that moment of profound, staggering foolishness, I laughed. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was a raw, the hollow sound that clawed its way up from my gut. A laugh that felt more like a sob. It was the sound of a 40-year legacy being dismissed as pocket change. The smile on Ethan's face melted, first into confusion, then into a dark, offended scowl. What's so funny about that? We solved a problem. I had to take a slow, rattling breath to stop the laugh from turning into a fit of coughing. The effort sent a dull ache through my incision. I raised a hand, my finger trembling slightly, and pointed it at my son. 200,000, I finally said, my voice a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to quiet the entire room. Son, for Black Creek Ranch. You didn't just sell a piece of land, you sold the heart of this entire enterprise. You sold an empire for a week on the beach, and some paid-off credit cards. The beep of the microwave from the kitchen suddenly sounded exactly like the heart monitor from my ICU room. The memory was so vivid it was like being there all over again. The scratchy, thin blanket pulled up to my chin. The window that looked out onto a concrete wall. The feeling of absolute powerlessness as doctors and nurses discussed my life in hushed tones just outside the door. I remembered Ethan's call, his voice crackling with false sincerity through the phone speaker. Hey, Dad. I just wanted to see how you are. Everything's fine here. Don't you worry about a thing. The foreman has the main homestead running like clockwork. Izzy is taking great care of the house. You just focus on you. He was telling a half-truth, a liar's trick. He spoke of the homestead, the 100 acres surrounding this house, knowing I would assume he meant the entire operation. While I was fighting for my next breath, his wife was selling off the source of our water, our wealth, our future. It was a fair price for a patch of useless dirt. Ethan's voice snapped me back to the present. His face was flushed, his jaw tight, Isabella had it professionally appraised, and you weren't in any condition to argue. We had to do something. In fact, he said, his voice rising with self-righteous anger as he strode to the heavy oak desk my own father had built. You gave us the authority yourself. He pulled a small stack of papers from a drawer and slammed them down on the coffee table. The top sheet was a durable power of attorney. And there, on the final line, was a signature that was supposed to be mine. I leaned forward, the pain in my side forgotten. I stared at the looping M and the sharp L. It was a meticulous copy. I had to give her that, but it was dead. My signature was a quick, decisive slash of ink, the product of 1,000 deals made and contracts signed. This was the work of a student, careful and studied. It was a forgery, and a bad one at that. A coldness that had nothing to do with the air conditioning seeped into my marrow. I never signed this paper. Ethan. Yes. You did? He shot back, his voice cracking. That morning, before the surgery, the nurse had just given you a sedative. You were all fuzzy. Remember, Isabella brought the papers in from her lawyer. She said it was just a formality. In case. You know, she said you understood. Your hand was shaking so much. She had to help you hold the pen steady. He truly believed it. The scene played out in my mind with horrifying clarity, my son, my only heir, standing by my hospital bed, watching his wife wrap my limp fingers around a pen to trace my name. And he interpreted it not as a violation, but as an act of compassion. I leaned back, the full weight of my 68 years pressing down on me. Anger was a wildfire, and it would burn me out if I let it loose. I needed the cold, hard clarity of logic. I needed facts. Tell me everything. I said again, my voice quiet but firm, leaving no room for argument. Tell me about this, Ricardo Vargas. Tell me about the lawyer. I want to know every single detail. He seemed relieved to have a task, to retreat into the safety of facts. He recounted the story Isabella had fed him. Vargas was an investor she'd met at a gallery opening. A charming man who'd mentioned he was looking to acquire land for a private nature preserve. When I fell ill, she'd remembered his interest and reached out. She'd used her own lawyer, a woman from a boutique firm downtown, to expedite the paperwork, to avoid bothering my legal team with such a small matter. Every detail was designed to sound plausible, efficient, and considerate. Every word was a carefully crafted lie. She had described Black Creek to him as your father's old sentimental project, a place he kept for the memories, not for the money. Barren, sentimental, small matter. She had systematically devalued his own inheritance in his mind, turning a jewel into a trinket he was eager to trade away. The hot ball of rage in my gut was now a cold, dense star. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching this scene from across the room. I was no longer just a father betrayed by his son. I was a strategist viewing a battlefield, assessing the damage, and planning the counterattack. My gaze drifted up to the mantelpiece, to Helen's smiling face in the portrait. Her eyes seemed to hold a quiet strength. I could almost hear her voice, a calm whisper in the storm of my thoughts. Protect or legacy. Marshall. But more importantly, protect our boys. Even if it means protecting them from themselves. She always knew Ethan's weakness was his desperate need for approval, a need that made him vulnerable to predators like Isabella. I looked back at my son. He had finished his story and was now watching me. The defensive anger on his face slowly being replaced by a dawning unease. He was finally beginning to understand that he hadn't just closed a real estate deal. He had kicked open a door and had no idea what was waiting on the other side. Maria entered from the kitchen, carrying a tray with a steaming bowl of beef broth. The rich aroma, which normally would have comforted me, turned my stomach. I gently waved her away. Food was an impossibility right now. All I could feel was a cold, hard resolve solidifying in my veins. My time as a patient was over. "All right, Ethan," I said. My voice was different now. It was the voice I used in boardrooms. The voice that had ended negotiations and built an empire. It was calm, devoid of heat, and absolutely final. It made him sit up straighter. Sight down. "Get comfortable. Don't say another word until I'm finished. First, I'm going to tell you about the real value of that barren piece of land. And then, I'm going to tell you exactly who and what you married." Ethan sat. He didn't just sit. He collapsed into the plush armchair opposite me, his body folding in on itself, as if the bones had suddenly gone soft. The bravado, the self-righteous anger from moments before, had evaporated, leaving behind a raw, bewildered uncertainty. He looked like a boy again. A boy who had been called to the principal's office and knew, on some primal level, that the world as he knew it was about to end. The only sound in the room was the solemn, heavy tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, each swing of its pendulum marking a second of his old life falling away. I let the silence stretch, letting it press down on him. I didn't begin with shouting or accusations. I began with a story. "The summer of '98, I said, my voice quiet, almost conversational. The whole state was in the middle of a drought that felt like the end of the world. Ranchers were selling off cattle for pennies on the dollar because their wells had run dry. The rivers looked like dusty roads. I remember standing on the porch of the old cabin at Black Creek, the air so hot and thick, it was like trying to breathe through a wool blanket. Your grandfather was with me." He put his hand on my shoulder, pointed to the ground with his walking stick, and said, "All these other fellas, they're looking at the sky, praying for rain. They're forgetting that the real wealth, the only thing that matters in a place like this, is what's under your feet." Ethan just stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, not understanding where this was going. He knew about the aquifer. Of course, his father knew. It's been the family's secret and its strength for 100 years. But it was just our water, for our land. After he passed, the energy companies started getting desperate. They were building new power plants that needed millions of gallons a day just for cooling. Their geologists knew the water was there, under my land, but they couldn't touch it. So they came to me, a parade of men in shiny shoes and $1,000 suits, walking into my office, their faces sweating in the Texas heat, talking about civic duty and progress. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, locking his gaze with my own. I turned them all down. For 2 years. Then, finally, the president of the whole damn corporation flew down himself. We sat at me desk, and I laid out my terms. Not a sale, a lease, a licensing agreement for access to a fraction of the aquifer's daily recharge rate. They weren't buying my water, they were paying for the privilege of borrowing it. I paused, letting the weight of that sink in. Your wife, Ethan, in her infinite wisdom, sold the land. What she didn't know, and what you never bothered to ask, is that attached to that land deed are 3 active, iron-clad water licensing contracts. Those contracts, Son, to pay this family $1.2 million a year. Every year. Rain or shine. The color drained from Ethan's face. It was a visible, physical reaction. He went from flushed to pale to a sickly, grayish white in the space of a heartbeat. He shook his head in a tiny, yarki motion, a gesture of pure denial. No, he whispered. No. She had it appraised. The man said 200,000 was a generous offer. An appraiser for the land. Maybe. I cut him off. My voice like gravel. For the dirt and the rocks. Did he test the water table? Did he review the associated mineral and resource rights filed with the county clerk? Or did he just kick a stone, look at the dry grass, and pull a number out of thin air? I reached for a heavy leather-bound portfolio on the side table and slid it across the coffee table's glass surface. It made a low, ominous sound as it came to a stop in front of him. That's the real appraisal. From 3 years ago, done by the best firm in Dallas for estate planning purposes. Open it. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the clasp. He opened the cover to the summary page. I knew the number at the top by heart, but I watched him read it for the first time. His eyes widened. He blinked, as if trying to clear them, and read it again. His breath hitched in his chest. 15 million. He breathed out, the words barely audible. It says $15 million. That's a conservative estimate. I said, my voice cold and flat. That's the value of the land. The water contracts, and the undeveloped mineral rights combined. She didn't just sell your inheritance for a vacation. Son, she sold the water that keeps the lights on for half this state. She sold the legacy your great-grandfather broke his back to build. And she sold it to a man who will bleed it dry and move on without a second thought. All for a check that amounts to a rounding error. The shame hit him then. It was a physical force. Bowing his head and rounding his shoulders. He was drowning. And I wasn't finished. I have to admit. I continued, my tone shifting from cold fact to something sharper. I was never as blind as you were. I saw something in Isabella from the day you brought her home. Hunger. The way her eyes would scan a room. Not taking in the people, but cataloging the value of the art on the walls, the silver in the cabinet. The way she'd ask questions about the business, disguised as innocent curiosity. A woman in love is curious about her partner's passions. A predator is curious about her prey's assets. I pulled out my laptop, opened it on the table, and clicked a few keys. The screen glowed to life. So, about 6 months after you were married, I made a phone call. I hired someone, a private investigator, a very discreet, very thorough woman named Eva Rostova. I initiated a video call. After 2 rings, a face appeared on the screen. It was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp features, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, and dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore no makeup. There was nothing soft about her. She was the polar opposite of Isabella's curated, delicate beauty. Marshall, she said, her voice crisp and professional. I'm glad to see you're home. Ava. I nodded. My son, Ethan, is here with me. I believe it's time you introduced him to the woman he married. Eva's gaze shifted slightly, her eyes assessing Ethan through the camera with a dispassionate, clinical air. Ethan, she said, without preamble. Your wife, who you know as Isabella Rossi. was born Chloe Perkins in Gary, Indiana. She has 2 prior convictions for petty larceny before the age of 20. After that, she got smarter. She has been fired from no fewer than 4 different companies for financial malfeasance. A hedge fund in Chicago, where she was a junior assistant, lost nearly $80,000 through a padded expense account scheme she created. A real estate firm in Miami, where a client's escrow account was mysteriously short $50,000 right before she quit. No criminal charges were ever filed. The companies preferred to handle it quietly. To avoid reputational damage, she just disappeared, changed her name, and moved on to the next target. Eva shared her screen. A file popped up, filled with documents, timelines, and photographs. Ethan stared at it, mesmerized and horrified. This is a photo of her. Eva continued, her cursor highlighting an image taken by one of my associates 3 months ago. That's long before your father's surgery. The picture showed Isabella seated at an outdoor table at a ridiculously expensive restaurant in Austin. She was laughing, her head tilted back, a wine glass in her hand. Across from her sat a man with cold, dark eyes and a smile that didn't touch them. Ricardo Vargas. She wasn't remembering a casual acquaintance. Ethan, I said softly, my voice cutting through his shock. She was cultivating a mark. This meeting was one of at least 5 we documented. She was hunting for a buyer for my land before I was even sick. Ethan made a choked sound, a mix of a gasp and a sob. But the worst was yet to come. And now, I said, reaching back into the leather portfolio and pulling out a large, folded document. I spread it across the coffee table, covering the laptop and the financial reports. It was a plat map, a detailed survey of Black Creek Ranch. Look closely. Son. I pointed to the map. It was clearly divided by thick, black lines into 3 separate parcels. 2 years ago, after a conversation with my lawyers, I legally subdivided the ranch. This main section, Parcel A, is where the grazing land is. It's the largest by acreage, but it's also the driest and least valuable. This smaller section, Parcel B, has the main wellheads and the pumping stations for the water contracts. And this one over here, Parcel C, is where the geological surveys show the highest concentration of mineral deposits. 3 separate parcels. Ethan, with 3 separate titles, 3 separate legal identities. I looked up at him, letting the truth land with the force of a physical blow. The deed your wife's lawyer drew up, the one with my forged signature on it. It's for Parcel A. Only Parcel A. She thought she was selling the entire treasure chest. But all she sold, all Mr. Vargas actually bought, was the empty wooden box. Ethan stared, his eyes tracing the lines on the map. He was seeing it now. The trap, the sheer, cold, calculated foresight. He was looking at me, but not as his ailing father. He was seeing a strategist, a chess player who had seen the attack coming and had already moved his queen into position. But who is this Vargas guy? He finally whispered, his voice trembling. Why would he want? Eva's voice cut in from the laptop, sharp and clear. Ricardo Vargas is not a nature enthusiast. Ethan, his primary business is laundering money for the Delgado cartel. He used large, cash-based land purchases to make their illicit profits look legitimate. Isabella didn't just stumble into a shady real estate deal. She willingly partnered with a professional criminal, a man who solves his problems in ways that don't involve lawyers. That was the final blow. The reality of it, the fraud, the cartels. The sheer scale of the danger crashed down on him. His face crumpled. The denial, the shock, the shame, it all gave way to pure, unadulterated terror. He dropped his head into his hands and began to sob. Not quiet tear, but deep, ragged, guttural sounds of a man whose entire world has been ripped out from under him. Oh God, he wept. What have I done? What did I let her do? I let him cry. I watched the painful, necessary destruction of the foolish boy. He needed to feel the full weight of his choices, to sit in the wreckage he had helped create. After a long minute, his sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. He looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. He was waiting for me to tell him what to do. I leaned back, my face hard as stone. You have a choice to make. Ethan, right now, there are two paths in front of you. On one path, you are your wife's accomplice. You can lie to protect her, and you will face the consequences of conspiracy and fraud right alongside her. You will lose everything. The other path. On that path, you help me fix this. You help me deliver a consequence so severe she will never recover from it. You start the long road to earning back your name, your honor, and your place in this family. I let the ultimatum hang in the air between us. You can be her partner in crime, or you can be my son again. You can't be both. He didn't hesitate. A new expression was hardening on his face, forged in the crucible of his shame and fear. It was determination, the look of a boy finally choosing to be a man. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and nodded. His jaw set. Tell me what to do. Dad. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small, featureless burner phone, the kind you buy for cash at a gas station. I placed it on the map in front of him, right on the parcel of land he had almost given away. Good, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper, cold and precise, as a surgeon's scalpel. Now, you are going to call your wife, and here is exactly what you are going to say. The small, black burner phone felt unnaturally heavy on the polished surface of the coffee table. It was an alien object in this room, of heirlooms and memories, a cold, anonymous piece of plastic that represented the grim business ahead. Ethan stared at it as if it were a venomous snake, his breathing still shallow and ragged. The storm of his weeping had passed, leaving behind a terrifying, fragile calm. He had made his choice, but the reality of what he had to do was just beginning to settle in, and it was a chilling weight. Eva's voice, crisp and devoid of emotion, emanated from the laptop speaker, cutting through the thick silence. The device is untraceable. The call will be routed through 3 international servers before it connects, but the most critical part is the recording. Marshall, my legal team has a conference line ready. We will add your son's call to it as a silent third party. It's the cleanest way to establish a legally admissible recording. The moment Isabella makes an admission, we have her. I nodded, my eyes never leaving my son's face. He looked broken. I had torn down the edifice of his life, lie by lie. And now I was asking him to sift through the rubble and hand me the weapon that would incriminate the woman he had, until an hour ago, loved. It was a cruel thing for a father to ask. It was also the only way to save him. You can do this. Ethan, I said, my voice softer than it had been. but no less firm. This isn't an act of betrayal. It's an act of survival. Your survival? He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. What do I say? Dad, how do I? How do I even pretend? You won't have to pretend, I said grimly. The fear you're feeling right now, that's real. The panic, the feeling that your world is collapsing, that's your fuel. You are not calling her as my son, seeking justice. You are calling her as her husband, her co-conspirator, who is terrified that the two of you are about to be caught. Eva took over, her tone that of a surgeon briefing her team. Ethan, your objective is to make her feel secure in her superiority. She sees you as weak, easily managed. You must confirm that perception. You are not angry. You are terrified. You are out of your depth. And you need her to fix it. We need her to get arrogant. Arrogance makes people careless. For the next 20 minutes, we coached him. It was the most difficult conversation of my life. I fed him the opening lines, the key phrases to use. We worked on his tone, his pacing. I made him rehearse the tremor in his voice. Don't just say the lawyers are looking into it. I instructed, say you overheard them talking. Say you heard the words fraud and forgery. Make it sound like you've stumbled upon a disaster you don't understand. He held the cold phone in his hand, his knuckles white. Sweat beaded on his forehead. I can't, he whispered, shaking his head. She'll know. She'll hear it in my voice. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. His was cold as ice. Yes, she will, I said, looking him straight in the eye. She will hear the voice of a panicked boy who is in way over his head, and she will feel contempt. She will feel the need to control you, to reassure you by reminding you how clever she is. And that, son, is when she will hang herself. Eva gave the signal. Her team was ready. The recording line was open. It was time. Ethan took a deep, shuddering breath, a condemned man's last gasp, and pressed the call button. He put the phone on speaker, and we all leaned in, our world shrinking to the size of that small, black rectangle. 1 ring, 2 rings. Then, the connection clicked open, and we were instantly transported from the tomb-like silence of my study to a world of vibrant, careless life. The sound was a physical assault. We could hear the faint, rhythmic pulse of calypso music, the splash of water, the high-pitched laughter of other vacationers, and the clinking of ice in a glass. It was the sound of stolen money being enjoyed. Hello, Isabella's voice came through, thick with impatience and the lazy drawl of someone who has been drinking in the sun. Ethan, what is it? I was in the middle of ordering another mojito. Ethan flinched. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. I gave him a sharp, insist look. Now, Izzy, he began, his voice a choked, unrecognizable croak. He cleared his throat. Izzy, we have a problem. A really, really big problem. There was a sigh on the other end, a sound of profound annoyance. Ethan, darling, there are no problems in the Bahamas. That's the whole point. Whatever it is. Can it wait? I'm about to go for a swim. No, he almost shouted. On the panic I'd coached him on, now flowing freely, authentically. No, it can't wait. It's Dad. He's not just home. He's had his lawyers here. All afternoon. They've been locked in the study with him. This got her attention. The background noise quieted slightly, as if she'd turned her head away from the pool. His lawyers. So what he's probably just updating his will, deciding which of his tractors to leave, to which farmhand. Don't be so dramatic. You don't understand. Ethan pressed, his voice cracking. I overheard them. I was in the hall. And they were talking about the ranch sale. About Saint Sebastian. They were using words, legal words, I didn't get. But I heard them. Izzy. I heard them say fraudulent appraisal and invalid signature. A beat of silence on her end. The calypso music seemed to mock us from 1,000,000 miles away. When she spoke again, the lazy, sun-drenched tone was gone, replaced by a sharp, condescending edge. Don't be an idiot. Ethan, your father is a dying old man, probably delirious from the medication. He's paranoid. What invalid signature I was there. You were there. I guided his hand myself because he was too weak to hold a pen. It was practically an act of mercy. Ethan was brilliant. He didn't argue. He just fell apart. Exactly as we'd planned. But they have the old appraisals. They're talking about $15 million. They're saying the buyer, Vargas, is some kind of criminal. The lawyers are looking at me. Izzy, they think I did something wrong. They think I stole from my own father. Oh, for God's sake. Grow a spine. She snapped. The mask was slipping. The charming, supportive wife was gone, replaced by the cold, ruthless operator underneath. You didn't do anything. I did everything. I handled it. I found the buyer. I got the papers signed. I moved the money. You just stood there and nodded like a good little boy. They have nothing on you because you were too stupid to be involved. My eyes met Eva's across the table. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. We have her. The admission was clear. I did everything. But I wanted more. I wanted the whole rotten truth on tape. Ethan, emboldened by our silent exchange, pushed the final, desperate button. But the signature, they said it doesn't match his legal signature on file. They said if he didn't sign it, then it's forgery. That's a crime. Izzy? A felony, I could go to jail. That's when she broke. The frustration, the arrogance, the sheer contempt she held for her husband, it all boiled over in a torrent of damning words. Oh my God. Are you serious? She shrieked, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. It's not forgery if it's perfect. Of course I knew the value of the land was more than 200,000. Do you think I'm an idiot that old man was hoarding it? Letting it rot. He didn't deserve that kind of wealth. And the signature was flawless. I practiced for a month, using copies of his old checks. There is no way. Absolutely no way. They can prove a thing, bingo. It was all there. A full confession, delivered with the righteous indignation of a true sociopath. The air in the room was electric. Eva was already typing furiously on her laptop, no doubt sending a time-stamped marker to her legal team. Suddenly, the connection crackled. Filled with a burst of static, Isabella's voice cut out for a terrifying second. My heart seized. Had we lost the connection, Ethan's face was a mask of panic. He improvised, his voice rising in desperation. Ija, are you there? I didn't hear you. What about the signature? What did you say you did? Her voice came back. To clear now, dripping with exasperation. I said, I practiced it. It's not a crime to have good handwriting. You idiot. It's done. It's over. The deal is closed. But the money, Ethan cried, playing his final card. What if they try to get the money back? What if they freeze the accounts? A low, cruel laugh echoed from the phone. It was the most chilling sound I had ever heard. Let them try, she said, her confidence completely restored. The 200,000 I gave you is in your local bank. Let them fight over that pittance. The rest of it, the real money, is already sitting in a numbered account in the Cayman Islands. It's a digital ghost. It doesn't exist. Nobody can touch it. Nobody. Now, pull yourself together. I'm going for a swim. We will talk about this later, when you've stopped acting like a child. The line went dead. Silence. The sudden absence of sound was a physical blow. The only noise was Ethan's ragged, shuddering breaths. He stared at the burner phone as if it had burned his hand. He had done it. He had walked through fire, and he had come out the other side. He slowly pushed the phone away from him and dropped his head into his hands. Completely and utterly spent. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, watching my son. A maelstrom of emotions warring inside me. Pride, pity, and a cold, hard satisfaction that was as bitter as it was necessary. The trap, so carefully set, had been sprung. The prey had not only walked into it, she had bragged about it. Eva was still for a moment, listening to something through a small earpiece. Her face was a blank, professional mask. After about a minute, which felt like an eternity, she looked up at me. A small, thin smile touched her lips. A predator's smile. My contacts on the Joint Task Force confirm they received the live feed of the recording, she said, her voice calm and final. A federal judge, citing flight risk and evidence of criminal conspiracy, has just issued a warrant. The U.S. Marshals are coordinating with the Bahamian authorities as we speak. They have already digitally frozen the Cayman account. She can't touch a single dollar. Eva closed her laptop. The quiet click echoed in the silent room. They'll have her in custody within the hour. Most likely before her drink gets warm. The storm was over. The lightning had struck. All that was left was the sound of the rain and the long back, arduous task of surveying the damage. I looked away from my son, away from the cold reality of the laptop and the burner phone, and out the large window toward the west. The sun was beginning to set, painting the vast Texas sky in brutal streaks of orange and red. I wasn't happy. There was no joy in this victory. There was only a profound, heavy sense of peace. The peace of a shepherd who has fought off the wolf, even when the wolf was sleeping in his own house. The war was won. Now, the cleanup had to begin. The sun had bled completely below the horizon, leaving the vast Texas sky bruised in shades of deep purple and fading crimson. The colors were violent and beautiful, a fitting backdrop for the quiet devastation that had just taken place within the walls of my home. Inside, the silence was a physical presence. It was heavier than grief, thicker than any unspoken anger. It was the sound of a world irrevocably altered. Eva had disconnected from the call. Her parting nod, a gesture of professional finality. All that remained was me and my son, sitting in the dim light of a single lamp, the ghost of Isabella's voice still seeming to hang in the air between us. Ethan hadn't moved. He sat hunched over, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, exhausted tremors. The adrenaline had abandoned him, leaving behind the hollow, aching reality of his own catastrophic failure of judgment. He had been a pawn, a fool, a willing accomplice in the attempted theft of his own birthright. And now he had been forced to be the instrument of justice. The cost of that was etched onto his very soul. I knew that whatever happened next, this single afternoon would forever divide his life into a before and an after. I didn't rush to comfort him. Some lessons are learned only in the desolate quiet of their immediate aftermath. To offer solace too soon is to dilute the potency of the poison, and he needed to feel all of it. He needed to understand the depth of the abyss he had stared into. So I waited, watching the last of the light fade from the sky, letting the shadows in the room deepen around us. Finally, after what felt like an hour, my phone buzzed on the table. A text message. It was from Eva. I picked it up, my movements slow and deliberate. Asset secured. She's in custody. Attached was a single photograph. It was low quality, likely taken with a cell phone by one of her contacts on the ground. But it was brutally clear. It showed Isabella, not in a bikini by the pool, but standing on the checkered tile of a resort lobby, her hands cuffed behind her back. She was flanked by two uniformed Bahamian police officers. Her hair was wet. Her face, a mask of shocked, furious disbelief. The beautiful, carefree goddess from the phone call was gone. In her place was a common criminal. Her cheap paradise revealed to be nothing more than a gilded cage whose door had just slammed shut. Her expression was not one of fear or remorse. It was one of pure, narcissistic outrage. The indignation of a queen bee whose hive had unexpectedly turned on her. That, I knew, was the true Isabella. I slid the phone across the table to Ethan. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and empty. He flinched when he saw the screen, then stared at the image for a long, silent moment. I watched as a complex series of emotions played across his face, a flicker of the old affection, instantly extinguished by the fresh pain of betrayal, a wave of pity, quickly replaced by a cold, hot anger. And then, finally, acceptance. The last thread of his delusion was severed. She's... he began, his voice a hoarse whisper. She's exactly who I told you she was. I finished for him. And now, the world will see it. Too, he pushed the phone back to me. What happens to Vargas Eva's report was concise. I said, recalling an earlier part of our conversation. Once they confirmed his account had received a multi-million-dollar wire transfer from an entity under investigation. It gave the federal authorities everything they needed. They picked him up at his office in Austin less than an hour ago. He was apparently very surprised. Men like him believe their money makes them untouchable. He nodded slowly, processing the finality of it all. The legal machinery was in motion now. A great, grinding engine of consequence that we had set loose. It was out of our hands. I rose from my chair, my muscles stiff, my body reminding me that I was still a man recovering from major surgery. Come on, I said gently. Let's get some air. I led him out the back door, onto the wide stone patio that overlooked the ranch. The night air was cool and clean, smelling of dust and distant rain. The stars were beginning to appear, a brilliant, indifferent canopy scattered across the blackness. We stood there in silence for a while, the only sound the chirping of crickets and the low, mournful sigh of the wind through the old live oak tree my grandfather had planted. This land, it was my life's work. It was in my blood, in my bones. Every fence post, every acre, every head of cattle represented a day of sweat, a moment of worry, A small victory against the unforgiving Texas climate. To walk on it now, knowing how close I had come to losing it, felt like a miracle. I ran my hand along the rough, weathered wood of the patio railing. It felt solid, real, a tangible piece of a legacy I had just pulled back from the brink. The anger I had felt earlier, that white-hot, consuming rage, was gone. In its place was a profound, quiet calm. It wasn't the thrill of victory or the satisfaction of revenge. It was the deep, resonant peace of restoration. The feeling of putting a dislocated bone back into its socket. It hurt, but it was right. Everything was finally back in its proper place. The next morning, my lawyers arrived. They were efficient, professional, and confirmed everything Eva had told us. The sale of Parcel A was now evidence in a federal criminal investigation, which made it trivially easy to have the transaction legally voided. The forged power of attorney was the nail in that coffin. The land was, for all legal intents and purposes, Mina again, as if the sale had never happened. Furthermore, they explained, because Vargas's assets were being seized as proceeds of crime, we had a strong civil case to claim significant damages for the fraud perpetrated against us. The money Isabella had stolen was just the beginning. The process of untangling Vargas's dirty finances would likely mean that, in the end, our family would be made more than whole. I explained all this to Ethan over a breakfast. Neither of us really ate. He listened quietly, his gaze fixed on the table. He wasn't celebrating the financial victory. He was beginning to understand that the true cost of this had nothing to do with money. That evening, I found him in the study, standing before the portrait of his mother. He was just looking up at her, his hands in his pockets, a lost look on his face. "I'm so sorry, Dad," he said, without turning around. His voice was thick with a shame, so heavy it felt like a physical weight in the room. "I'm not just sorry for what happened. I'm sorry for why it happened. I was weak. I was jealous of you. Of this." He gestured vaguely at the room, at the house, at the empire outside the window. I wanted something that was mine. I wanted to feel important, and she saw that. She knew exactly which buttons to push. And I let her. I let her because it was easier than doing the hard work of becoming a man I could be proud of on my own. It was the most honest thing I had ever heard him say. I walked over and stood beside him, my eyes also on Helen's portrait. "A legacy isn't just land or money, son," I said softly. "It's the wisdom to protect what you love. It's the strength to build things that last, and it's the humility to admit when you are wrong. Today, and yesterday, you started to learn that lesson. It was a brutal education, but you learned it." I paused, then told him the final piece. There was one last safety net, something not even Eva knew about, because it was a private family matter. He looked at me, confused. "In my will, established with your mother years ago, there's a clause. The Helen clause, we called it. It stipulates that any sale of primary family assets conducted while I am incapacitated requires validation by a 3-person panel, my primary physician, the senior partner at my law firm, and my brother, your uncle. Without their 3 signatures, no sale is considered final. It was our ultimate firewall, built on the one thing I knew. Isabella could never fake the trust of people who have known me my entire life. So you see, even if her forgery had been perfect, even if my plan had failed, She would never have truly won. The fortress was stronger than she knew. Ethan stared at me, a look of awe on his face. He was finally seeing the whole picture. Not just a trap, but a fortress with layers upon layers of protection built over a lifetime of prudence and care. Now comes the hard part, I said, turning to face him fully. Rebuilding. Trust isn't a switch you can flip back on. Ethan, it has to be earned back, day by day, decision by decision. I walked over to the desk and pulled out the plat map we had looked at the day before. I spread it out. This, I said, tapping the section marked Parcel A. The barren land that had been the bait. This is yours now. He recoiled. Dad. No, I couldn't. You will? I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. It's worthless for grazing, as your wife so astutely pointed out, but with the right irrigation, drawing from our own wells, and with a hell of a lot of hard work, it can be made fertile again. It will be your project, your responsibility. You will bring it back to life. You will learn its soil, its water, its every contour. You will pour your own sweat into it, and you will make it worth something again. That is how you begin. A flicker of something I hadn't seen in a long time sparked in his eyes. Not the hollow pride he'd shown before, but a glimmer of genuine purpose. It was the look of a man being handed, not a punishment, but a path to redemption. Later, as twilight settled once more, we stood on the patio again, side by side. We weren't a broken father and a shamed son. We were just two men, Marshall and Ethan, looking out over our land. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of life and earth. The scars from this battle would remain. I knew that, but they were clean scars now. Reminders of a terrible lesson learned and a war that, against all odds, had been won. The empire was safe. The legacy was secure. And my son, my foolish, broken, beloved son, was finally home.